And this all ties back to your time in audit where you were not a good auditor, not a good accountant, but loved by the team and loved by your managers and had a great team environment and got the highest performance reviews on the team simply because you were likable. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. I was also just as bad at golfing then as I am now, but my senior manager who loved golfing, I could always chat through with him about it and give him a reprieve from what was going on audit-wise that made people feel better.
What's up, everybody? My name is Mike Whitmire. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Flowcast, Inactive CPA, and the co-host of Blood, Sweat, and Balance Sheets, the podcast where we like to chat with finance executives, entrepreneurs, people in the tech world in general, and really just kind of talk about whatever I want. Today is a very exciting episode. For starters, we have a really, really exciting guest I'm excited to chat about, which is Adam Zuha, a longtime Flowcaster. But then also, it's our first episode live from our new studio here. I love the look. I think it's awesome. It's way cleaner than me doing calls from my shed with my little hanging microphone. So it's awesome to be here. And without further ado, let's kick into it with Adam Zuha of Flowcast. Adam, welcome aboard. You want to give us a little introduction on yourself before we kick it off?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's fun to join you in this forum. You and I have had many other Flowcast related conversations over the last 8 years now. Just based on that background, I was the first BDR at Flowcast a little bit over 8 years ago, helping to take Flowcast to market at a time where I think we had one or two clients at that point. Held almost every sales role possible in the department over the last 8 years, and now oversee all that we do in our European business as the managing director of EMEA. So I live here in London now as a dual citizen, which is a unique experience as well.
Yeah, I think you maybe undersold yourself a little bit there. Let me recap your career at Flowcast because it's been pretty amazing. And yeah, like you said, you started 8 years ago. Our very first BDR, that's a business development rep. For those who are not familiar with that role, you send a lot of emails, you make a lot of cold calls, you want to get prospects on the phone to demo Flowcast, see if it's a good fit for them, and then close the deal from there. That goes to an account executive who closes the deal. Adam was then promoted into the AE role. I'm not going to say the best, but one of the best AEs we ever had here at Flowcast, then was promoted to sales manager, then to director of sales, and then went off to London to open our EMEA office and is the general manager of our EMEA office. And Adam, how many people do you have out in London now rolling up to you?
Just over 40.
Just over 40?
Yeah, group is growing weekly still.
Yeah, so if we think about that, you started at Flowcast when we had like 10 people, and you were the second person hired into sales, and we had like 2 clients at the time, and you're now managing a team that is 4 times as large as the entire company was when you first started. That's a pretty awesome rise. I'm curious, like, you transitioned out of audit, you came over to Flowcast. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way at Flowcast, and do you think your background in audit has helped with any of those?
Yeah, it definitely helped. I kind of fell into audit to begin with, so somewhat of a funny.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, funny story. I studied business entrepreneurship at USC in undergrad, but Matt Barkley was coming back for his next year for USC football, and we were going to be ranked number 1 in the country. So I naturally said, I got to find a way to come back to school too. So I applied to 1-year master's programs, one of which was Masters of Accountancy, which I got into and a little bit of a scholarship. So came back to USC for a 5th year, did my Masters of Accountancy, and then validated that degree by then going into Deloitte Audit in San Francisco. Despite Matt Barkley coming back, we still went 7-6, and I think finished the season unranked, by the way. But I thought,
you finished unranked?
I feel like I had what I would call an undefeated season as a 5th year senior in the master's program. So I enjoyed myself, and then moved back up to San Francisco, where I'm from, to work for Deloitte in audit for a couple of years, and then got in touch with a friend of a friend at Amplify LA, the incubator that Flowcast came out of, to move down to Los Angeles and learn more about the tech scene. So I wasn't necessarily targeting Flowcast as, in the accounting software space at the time, but he was talking to me about Amplify and the tech scene in Los Angeles, and said, hey, we just had this really awesome company that just graduated, going out on their own from the incubator at Amplify. You should get in contact with them. So he put us in touch, and the rest is history from there.
That was awesome. It's so cool that Amplify was such a good connection with all that. And in your time at Deloitte, if I remember correctly, you audited pretty large businesses, right? Like, you're on a large pharmaceutical company?
Yeah, I was on Deloitte's largest audit client that they had globally. Massive pharmaceutical distributor. Financial center was out of Dallas, but they are headquartered in San Francisco. So I traveled to Dallas, I think 50 or 60 nights my first year in audit. And that was really my only client for the time that I was at Deloitte. It was such a large client that you built. Yeah. We had a very close team, and I was working really closely together with the same team every single year.
You know, that's an interesting part of the audit experience. So mine was different, right? I had mid-market clients and had like kind of 4 or 5 main clients I bounced around over the course of the year, whereas you had one. Do you think there's a benefit to having one larger client and getting to know a team, or would you, in reflecting on it, would you have preferred to have multiple clients?
I absolutely loved having the one team. We were really close, and there's many aspects of audit in general that were helpful coming to an accounting software company. But I think more important was how to operate within a team and how to motivate individual people. We talked about at the top of this that I manage 40 people here in Europe. Everyone's different. Everyone has different motivators as to what makes them tick. And it's the same thing in an audit team. You get to know the personalities, and the longer you're on that singular client and within that audit room or going out to dinners like we did every single year on the road in Dallas, you really got to know these people and understand what's motivating them, what's making them tick, and how to best work together. So I took all of that, what was learned in that team atmosphere, to apply to Flowcast and how we built out these different departments over the years at Flowcast.
That's really interesting, because I guess in thinking about you as an auditor, I'm picturing like a staff one, younger person, just kind of part of the job. But then in working with you, I've learned you're a very natural leader, and people just sort of look up to you naturally. And so now I'm trying to envision you in the audit room before, and now I'm not thinking of you as a guy with his head down doing work papers. Now I'm actually starting to think about you as like the cultural leader and people looking up to you and helping drive that. Was that the case? Did you just sort of naturally find yourself like building this team culture? Because that's what I saw at Flowcast. You came in and little stuff, right? Like when you came in and you're like, we need to have a Christmas party, and you organized our first like Christmas holiday party and got all that set up. And it was like just a natural thing that's a part of you. Was it that way even as in a staff role?
It was more that way. Yeah. I always played to my strengths, and my strengths weren't necessarily accounting and doing the actual audit work. My strength was
tell me more.
Well, I don't know if you remember this, but I think in my first couple of weeks at Flowcast, once I started, you actually had me close the books or try to close the books, and we were using Xero back then, and you stood over my shoulder as I was trying to make entries, and realized within, I think, 30 seconds that I was not going to be the one closing the books at Flowcast, and that I should just continue to be on the phones trying to sell.
So focus on talking to people.
Yeah, exactly. That applied to the audit room as well. Although I did get the highest rating in my first year audit class, I will say, but I still think it's more so a result of how I sold myself to the managers than the work itself. But I like to keep the mood light.
If you're the person in an audit room who can keep culture good and keep people happy, I would say you're like the MVP of that team. It doesn't matter if you're bad at banging out a work paper or not. If you can somehow like help keep a team happy and motivated, yeah, you should get a really high performance review.
That's how it was. We had a really close team. I had the benefit of I was on a great team, and I loved everyone I worked with. In fact, talking about multiple clients, there was one down period in the time that I was at Deloitte where I was staffed on another client, and I disliked it so much I called the senior manager back on my normal job and told him to get me off of this and call me back into the team for making up a reason that I was needed. So it was this relationship that we all had, and everyone was happier. And if everyone was happier, we were working long hours like audit does, and on top of that, we were traveling and staying in outside of Dallas in Marriott hotels for 50 nights. away from friends and family and things like that. So the more camaraderie that we all had and keeping things light and fun, the better we work together. I think that applies to the sales team now that we're running in all different departments that we run at Flowcast. I always tell people in interviews that I want you to be as comfortable as possible when you're coming to work, because I think people who come into a comfortable environment then allow their best self to shine, and just let it flow. Just go with what you're going to perform better in that environment.
Oh, totally. Yeah, what's the saying? Well, I guess it's look good, feel good, play good. It's that whole part about feeling good and you'll play good. That's very, very true. Just one more thing before we kind of move back in, or I guess we'll transition towards Flowcast here. You came out of, so Deloitte's is obviously a very large company. You're auditing a really large business and then decided, hey, I want to go to a company with less than 10 people. That can be scary for a lot of people to transition from, a big company to a small company, but particularly for a lot of accountants with a more conservative personality. So why were you so gung-ho on leaving big company culture, wanting to go to a startup? How was that adjustment for you? Tell me more.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had a lot of friends who were in tech sales, just in the Bay Area and being around that scene. So I knew how a lot of them operated, albeit I think most of them were, for larger companies, still even in the tech scene at that time. None of them were at 10 or less than 10 person companies. So I wasn't properly forewarned for what I was getting into. And
yeah, if I remember correctly, your friends were kind of they were startups, but pre-IPO, they're pretty much all public now. And it wasn't that like 10 person stage, but like established, but some risk because they weren't public yet. Is that kind of the phase your friends were at?
They were probably Series C, Series D type, or anywhere from B to D, less risk. And I was more naive to the risk that I was jumping into.
Yes, you were. I don't think people process how much risk there is from Series Exceed, so Series A to B. They're like every step down the fundraising funnel is a point of risk and the company not making it from there. So yeah, man, you took a much bigger leap at the seed stage versus the Series C stage.
Yeah, when I moved down to Los Angeles, I was living with the best man in my wedding's parents in Pasadena, who just agreed to house me basically for a month while I figured out an apartment in Los Angeles. And I think you told me a couple months later that if whichever round of funding at the time hadn't hit the bank, that we were actually like 9 days away from not even being able to pay payroll at that time back in 2013. So there were a lot of elements that I wasn't aware of, and I was just jumping into it and saying, hey, let's see how this thing goes. I remember coming into the first day, and you go into a Deloitte or a larger corporation, and it's all structured, right? It's everything they're taking you through is a process that's been done before. And I came in, there was no structure, no process. No one told me to do anything.
We had a desk for you. I built a desk for you. Yeah, come on.
That's a tradition that's that stayed with us throughout the years at Flowcast as well. Every single new office that we've gone to at Flowcast, including the 3 that we've now had here in London in the last 2 years, I require all the new employees to continue to build their own desks, and I still help out as well.
Nice. Hey, it's fun, and you can learn a lot about somebody by watching them assemble IKEA furniture. I will throw that out there.
That's true. Yeah, but I just remember it was a shock to the system, the lack of structure. I think I sat down with you guys and you were saying, what you're trying to do and the type of messaging. Back in that day, you immediately handed me Predictable Revenue as the book that became our Bible in terms of how we were going to structure the sales department, and I was going to be the person sourcing all of the demonstrations for the account executives to run, and we're going to be very, very structured and specialized. But we didn't know the messaging that was going to work yet. We were still figuring out the systems that were going to send out the messaging. We were still tailoring and figuring out how we were going to demo the product. But I will say we always had it figured out as to who our buyer was. And then I think we figured out that messaging quite early with just a couple of tweaks.
I agree. I think in reflecting on 2015, which is really when we started selling, and it was, you, me, Dave, Shavong, and no marketing. It was just us coming up with all the positioning. I think we did a pretty decent job in our first year of figuring this out. And then obviously you bring in full marketing and it helps get that even better. But that was a fun first year getting stuff figured out, just like literally figuring things out and getting it off the ground and having, what I would say was a pretty successful first 12 months of going from zero to closing. I don't want to say the numbers, but like pretty proud reflecting on 2015 and how much we did in our first year.
Yeah, the mission to always be kind of the right-hand man or the best solution for the controller was always something that we knew and were trying to solve for. How we did that, we figured out over the years and continue to listen to our clients. But telling the CFO that the controller needs this type of system to do their job most effectively was something that we were always honed in on.
Yeah, well, and I think we did a really good job of targeting controllers more directly. You look at our competition, they leveled up the messaging to that CFO level. And the reality is the controller is the one overseeing the close, and we took the time to reach out to them directly and spend time marketing to them. And I think that served us really well, focusing on that persona instead of sending presents to the CFOs and stuff like that. We're more focused on providing value to the controller. But okay, so you started as a BDR, you're doing your outbound thing, you're booking demos. Tell me more about the transition to the AE role. What was that job like? What was the transition? What's different about it? And I'd love to continue that forward. Tell me more about sales management, directing sales, and then launching London as well. Let's go through the career trajectory at Flowcast.
Yeah, it was all, we were not that many people, so you're doing a lot of things at once. So as I was transitioning from a BDR to account executive, learning how to sell and close and all those things. And, I did it having a great mentor and someone who was teaching me a lot on how to sell at the time. I was also then hiring the new BDRs that we were hiring at the time and managing those. So I was managing the BDR team and then closing business as an account executive. And then it just kind of got into this cycle as I continued forward that I continued to do the job that I wanted next or that I was going to be doing next. So after I started closing as an AE, I then started interviewing and hiring the next AEs that we were looking at, training those folks. And then naturally that just fell into sales management. So then I started managing those AEs. And then as the company grew, you have more resources and things, so that we built out middle management at the BDR level and the AE level, so that I could overlook more strategically until I was overseeing effectively the whole of U.S. direct sales for a while Ken was building out everything that we were doing from a partnership organization. And then we were brought in Jill Cooper to be our VP of sales, which was amazing because I could work and learn alongside Jill and basically pass everything off to her and have her take it to a new level in the U.S., which allowed me to then step away and do it all over again in Europe. So I kind of, a lot of people think that why would you want to do it all again? Why would you want to start from scratch and have to go through all the testing and the failures of what works and what doesn't work? And it's a lot easier with 5 years of hindsight. I'll say that. But I also think I cheated the system a little bit in that I got that kind of small family feel again. So this culture that we've built here in London and at Flowcast in general is just one where everyone's coming together. They're working hard. You feel like everyone's listening and feeding off of each other. So I was able to trade off, we were an organization of 400 people or so at the time when I left Los Angeles in for another office of 5 people to start it all over again. And it's just fun to build in that sense.
Yeah, it's really nice. And I remember we talked about this before you took the position. It's like you get to do a startup again, but without all the risk because you have a big, support function back in the US and all the funding and the brand and backing and all that good stuff. So you got the best of both worlds. It's a moderate risk, high reward proposition if you ask me, whereas before it was a high risk, high reward proposition doing this. So I would love to, but going back to those roles, like what kind of changed at each level? Because I asked that because everyone, it seems like a lot of people are just really maniacally focused on, I want to get promoted, but don't maybe take a step back and think about what that role is going to be like or if they're going to enjoy it. So just as you've moved up from individual contributor to manager to direct now leader, what were some of the shocks? Were there things you didn't like about that role when you moved into it that you had to get used to? How'd you learn different things? Like what were some of those challenges along the way?
Yeah, it's different for the different roles. I'm a big control person. I like to be or feel like I'm in control at all times, which leads nicely to the individual contributor and what you're doing as an account executive and driving the deals. But as you go into management, the hardest thing for me was letting go, and I probably stayed more involved than I should have. That stunted the development of some of the reps, or just elongated maybe their ramp time. So that was a big adjustment.
Can you dig in? Sorry, that's a really important thing. Can you dig into that a little bit more? Like maybe explain to the audience what you mean and how to avoid that.
Yeah, for myself, I would, because I had done all the roles and I was so knowledgeable about Flowcast from the start. I always thought the deal has such a higher percentage of closing if I'm on the calls and I'm heavily involved in the deals. And because I was somewhat of a control freak and couldn't let go, the idea was to let the rep, handle the call and be driving things forward. But the minute that I saw a stumble or somewhere that I could come in, I oftentimes would unmute and just take over. It led to a lot of new clients coming in because I was an expert at what we were doing. But at the same time, it, I think, led to a harder time for us to scale as a sales department because I wasn't allowing the reps to do everything that they needed to do and to learn from the mistakes they made and from the successes they were having as well. So I think, tools like Gong make it so much easier now that that wasn't available when I was managing direct contributors.
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, it's something that I definitely struggled with and had to learn. But I think part of what I learned and part of what gave me the freedom to adjust is what I felt from managing. So that manager feeling of the success that your teammates have, the reps that you're managing, is just so powerful. I'm someone, I guess, sometimes to the detriment to my personal relationships, I kind of, and unfortunately my wife falls into this category where I always am more focused on how much fun people around me are having and how well they're doing. So I think that fed straight into that great feeling, or feeding into that feeling as a manager. I loved seeing the success of the individual reps and how they were developing, and how much fun it was for them to win and sign the new clients and all those different things that came with it. So I then harnessed that feeling as to take a step back and learn a different way to manage and let the reps develop on their own.
I'm glad you went into that. I wanted to just open that up a little bit because that is a hard thing as a manager. You move up and you have some people reporting to you. Maybe they're not performing that well, and it's, oh, do I just help them and get this done, or do I let them fail, and how do I approach this? And particularly when you're at a startup where it's not like you have a massive team and every single deal that we're closing matters. And, I don't need the data to know that if you're speaking on a call, it's going to be a higher close rate than if you're not. That's just like objectively true. And so it's such a fine line for managers to play. And I just don't think it's something people are cognizant of when they take a position like, oh man, if I have a poor performer, sometimes I have to let them fail and learn from that failure. Or if they're not learning from these failures, we got to level up the team from there. And it is just a really difficult thing for managers to understand. So I'm glad you opened up with that a little bit because I wanted to dig into that area. Now, let's talk about Jill coming in, because this is an area where, like, when people ask me about who some of the all-stars at Flowcast are, I talk about you. I talk about how well you've performed and how you've just like run with every single challenge we've given you and you've crushed it. And then I had to come to you one day and be like, hey, Adam, I know you've done amazing work with every single thing you've done, but we want to hire an executive to oversee sales. And I was like, admittedly, I was very scared to have that conversation with you because a lot of people could respond with like, what the hell? Why are you going to top me? Like, well, I've done everything the right way. Like, why do you have to bring someone in here? But you did not respond that way. Can you tell me more? We haven't talked about this, I think, in this kind of way since then, but like, tell me more about where your head was at when all that came in, and then just like your mentality with bringing Jill in and how you approach that whole thing.
Yeah, it was jumbled. That's how my head was. I didn't really know what to think at the time. I thought I would just let it play out a bit, see what type of candidates that you brought to the table. On the VP of sales side, I did have that feeling of, I've done so much for this company. Why am I not the person to take the role? But I think I also took a step back and talked to people in my network, and you've always done a great job of giving us access to people on our board as well who oversee, or on boards of multiple companies, and chatting with some of those folks to learn about what you need to really scale and build a bigger company gave me more confidence of bringing in that type of role. But at the end of the day, it really just came down to Jill. If it was someone different that was brought in, then it could have been a different story. But Jill took a great approach in really just continuing to let me do my own thing and shadow me for 6 to 9 months. So she wasn't disruptive. She was learning the current process in place and contributing to it so that she could then build on it and take it to a new level. And she did it with such a friendly demeanor and an attitude of, hey, I appreciate everything that you've done so far. And these are all the things that you are an expert at in terms of selling Flowcast. Let me suggest some of the things that I've done and seen at the organizations that I've run, and we're very collaborative in that sense. So it's hard for me to say that it would have gone any differently because that's the only experience that I had. But Jill taking it the way that she did and being the way that she was, really allowed it to have success. And for me, it allowed me to then do what I'm doing now. And we didn't even know that at the time. We weren't necessarily talking about me going to London. I think I had mentioned to you that I was a dual citizen. My mom was born in London, and I had interest in living in Europe at some point. But really, Jill coming in and being able to take over all of that responsibility and pass so much of that on to her allowed me to step away and then take on this new responsibility in London, which has been one of the best experiences of my life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't recall exactly when we had the London discussion, if that was maybe even floated around the Jill hiring timeframe. I know it was at least in the back of my mind for a while. I heard through the grapevine it was in the back of your mind for a while as well. It's something you've been thinking about since your second week at Flowcast or something like that?
Yeah, I always talked about it. My wife had grew up in Rome for a while, and I always loved traveling around Europe. So it was always something that if I could build towards doing, I'd love to.
The story I heard was that at your second or third week at Flowcast, you were at the food truck with somebody, and you said, "I'm going to launch our London office one day." And what was it? 6 years later, you made that happen. That's pretty incredible. I don't know. The power of like having a goal and focusing on it and making it happen is really impressive. So yeah, congrats on all that, man.
I don't know how serious I was outside the food truck. I was probably just young, dumb, and talking at the time, but I'm glad it worked out.
Run in your mouth. Yeah, I think it worked out. Well, Back to Jill and hiring a VP. That was that was the first time you had gone through it, but it wasn't my first time going through it at that point, right? We had hired a prior executive, did not go well. We ended up having someone who I would consider an all-star leave as a result of me topping them because they had performed so well. And I'll just say my learning experience was that we have someone who's great at this with Adam, and there's no like hair on fire need to hire a new sales leader. And to impress Adam, this person has to be incredible. And I have the wonderful luxury of waiting for somebody who's incredible to fill this role because you're doing it already. So in many ways, you set me up for success for being able to take the time to find somebody of such high caliber, which then made it such that you respected the new person who came in. You were genuinely able to learn from her. She had the right approach, and then you were able to kind of grow and then go off and launch London from there. And that was, at least from my perspective, the big challenge heading into it, which is a great like challenge and opportunity, a place to be in, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Because could have still gone
I'm curious,
off in flames. The credits to Jill on how she was.
Yeah, I know. You never know when you hire somebody, right? You're always taking a risk. But I'm actually curious. So, did you speak with Gary during the process?
I did speak with Gary. And
for some context for those listening, Gary Swart is one of our board members. He used to work with our SVP of sales, Jill Cooper. So did heavy, vouching for her and all this stuff. And then I know you and Gary have a relationship. So that's why I ask.
Yeah, I spoke to Gary about it. And at the time, or months prior, we had also used a sales consultant named Jeff Wells, who
he was great. I forgot about that time frame. Yeah.
And Jeff used to work with Gary and Jill together. And, Jeff was kind of a VP of sales consultant. So, and I was working closely with him. So he was able to vouch for Jill as well. So the combo of having that personal network and two people that I respected, greatly in the sales realm of things was really easy to trust as well.
Yeah. I want to give a little plug. Working with Jeff was great. Is he still doing his thing with like interim VP of sales positions and everything?
I haven't caught up with him in a while. He was fantastic. I do remember one thing, this one line that stuck in his head, because he was helping source the VP of sales too. He was helping, I think, recruit or look or at least be a part of the interview process for us at the time.
He was helping interview.
And he was laughing at some of the requirements, because he's like, yeah, Flowcast is asking for someone who's gone from 0 to 100 million in sales, who was there at 0 and went to 100 million. He's like, there's like 100 people like that in the entire country. So I've been waiting for the day that I can tell Jeff that I'm one of those people who now has gone from 0 to 100, so that he can put that on the resume.
Yeah, I hope so. Wow, that's really cool. Yes, it's a very select group that's made that happen. All right, so let's see. We've covered off on career path, accounting, all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about maybe a little personal. You've scaled a lot as a human being as well on the side while working a really stressful job at a startup. Any tips for managing work-life balance as you're trying to like build a career and build a life outside of work? How do you stay sane, Adam? Tell me more about that.
I think staying sane is just by continuing to draw on the things that are important to you. You need to do those things outside of work, that make you feel good, that take your mind off of things. And I'd say, admittedly, the first 4 years at Flowcast, while we were building so much, my mind was always on Flowcast, and I would finish the workday and come home and eat, and probably still be working on things on my computer while I watched, shows with my now wife. But I still had that feeling of being with someone. So the fact that I was spending time with my wife at the time, or my friends on the weekends, or doing things like golfing or going to the beach, you got to find your different escapes. And when I was living in Los Angeles, I was someone who lived in Santa Monica near the beach. So I was on the beach 4 or 5 days a week. Jumping in the ocean is always kind of a reset for me. So you got to find those things that give you, a reset. I know you don't like sand or getting beach all over yourself, but
no, just for those who haven't been in the Pacific Ocean, yeah, it'll wake you up. It is cold out there.
Cold plunges before before cold.
Dude,
plunges.
Reset's an understatement. Yeah. Yeah. All right, and that must have been the toughest part of moving to London. Is no beaches and
that is the toughest part about living in London is no beaches and a lack of sun. But great thing is that there's so many different places that are on your doorstep to travel to for even just a weekend and see that coastline.
That is a really good point. All right, so I think we're coming up on time here. I wanted to wrap it with, we have former accountants on who have gone through the finance executive route, through the entrepreneur route. Rarely do we have people who have come up through sort of the business development ranks and gone on to like really run teams and large operations within a company. So for those who are interested in more of that go-to-market, that strategic side, being a general operator, like what kind of advice would you give them for what they're learning in accounting today, and then what they should focus on learning and how they can carry that into their next role?
Yeah, when we hire accountants into any role, I think part of the reason that we do it and it's worked so well is because of the mentality that accountants have. And I come back to that great work ethic and organization. So if you start with those two things as a baseline, you can build yourself into any role. So I would say learn those things, learn how to be organized, learn how to structure your day for whichever job you have in accounting or audit as you're making your transition to whatever your next role is. And then learn how to build relationships. Within your team, the most important thing that I've learned is building relationships with the people around you. And that doesn't need to be, I'm not Mr. Networker out there. I'm not going to random networking events or being the first guy to shake any random person's hand. But the people you're working around and along on a daily basis, find out what's going on in their life, find out what's important to them, find out if, they're a competitor and they need to see themselves at the top of the list, or if they get to a certain mark in their life, they're satisfied with just them. They don't need to look at anyone else around them. So that self-motivation piece is something that I think can't really be taught. So if you can tap into what motivates people and how someone is making themselves go, then you can really open them up to be the best.
I think with part of your job is, as long as somebody has that baseline of working hard, and I'll also throw in there just like caring about what they're doing and caring really good about what they're doing. At that point, it's sort of your job to direct them into the right role in some regards. Different personalities have different fits for different positions. And I view that as part of my job. And then I would say extension of part of your job is to like know someone, get to work with them, get a good, comfortable like read on their baseline work ethic, and then figure out, hey, how can we put you in the best position to succeed with a different role at Flowcast? And not everyone is a salesperson, not everyone's a setup person, not everyone's a customer or accounting success manager. It's just different. And I think that like identifying of talent and putting people in a position to succeed is something that is really important and something that you do really well.
Yeah, I think that's the single most important trait for a manager is caring. And I'm proud to say that all the managers I work here with in the London office and most that I see, in the sales department across Flowcast, they all truly care. And if they're putting in that, that care and that passion, and I think back to my time as an AE or an individual contributor, that's all you're looking for in your manager. If you can tell that they care, then you want to work harder for them as well as yourself. So I think it's the most important thing.
And this all ties back to your time in audit, where you were not a good auditor, not a good accountant, but loved by the team and loved by your managers and had a great team environment and got the highest performance reviews on the team simply because you were likable. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. I was also just as bad at golfing then as I am now, but my senior manager who loved golfing, I could always chat through with him about it and give him a reprieve from what was going on audit-wise that made people feel better.
You're not a bad golfer. You're in like in the world of golfers. I want to say you're like a top 10% golfer. What are you now? 12? What are you?
11.
Right?
11 and trending
11?
in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, me too. All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up on a little bit of golf or lamenting there because, our games aren't doing too well. I don't have an excuse. You at least have an excuse if you got to get on the tube to go play some golf. That sounds brutal.
That is my excuse.
Yeah, it's a good one. Good one. All right. Well, Adam, I really appreciate you taking the time. And just want to say it's awesome that we're here 8 years later talking about your progression, and it's been absolutely amazing working with you. And I just feel so lucky to have you at Flowcast, man. So thank you for everything. And I'm so cool that you're on this podcast now giving advice for the audience.
Thanks, Mike. Love the run.
All right.
On to many more.
Yes. All right. Well, have a good night for you. Appreciate you being on late.
Thanks. I got The Bachelorette just came out, first episode here in London. So night one.
All right. Well, Adam's going to go enjoy The Bachelorette, come up with some gambling game around it. You can figure out who's going to win. And for everyone else, enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it.